Welcome everybody to another glorious episode of Real Talk Perspectives. Our subject today is the top 5 most common leadership challenges. As usual, your hosts Brad Solomon and Frank Brzezinski are completely unprepared to share their unsolicited yet highly enthusiastic views on the subject of the day. Here we go. Good morning, Brad.
Frank, good morning. You just made me laugh out loud. Glorious podcast episode and totally unprepared. Just managing the expectations of all the listeners to our Real Talk series. Yeah, listen, I think this is great, right? Doing like a top 5 checklist and diving in. It's like, actually, these are the things that people struggle with every day, every week, every month, every quarter. And it doesn't really matter what decade you're in. I believe these are lifelong challenges.
They're timeless.
That you've come up with. Which one do you want to kick off with first?
Let's start with number 1, which is conflict in teams. I know that we've had a session about conflict, how to deal with conflict at work last time, but perhaps for everybody who wouldn't see this, what would be your, let's say, number 1 tip for a leader who is facing this as a leadership challenge?
I think it's a fascinating topic. We did unpick it last time. For me, it goes into just 2 simple parts: trust to create healthy conflict. So I think a lot of leaders will often be quite unsettled when there's conflict in the team. And every time a new member joins or somebody leaves or someone gets a promotion, the conflict bubbles underneath the surface. And if we're not able to create an environment where people are really okay with calling out some conflict, challenging someone maybe for a contribution or a lack of contribution, then it simmers. And as soon as it starts to simmer, I think we start to lose accountability of how we execute and do things. So for me, my number 1 tip is, as a leader, focusing my attention on creating trust in the team, a healthy level of trust, of intimacy, credibility, and reliability, so that we have the space for healthy conflict, meaning that we can sit in a team meeting and I can say, hey guys, listen, Frank, you were bringing something to me this morning. You said you wanted to talk about the team's performance. The floor's yours. Guys, let's listen to Frank and then we can unpick it together. And I think if you don't have that trust element, you'll never be in a position to confront the healthy conflict. So for me, it's building trust.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. My number 1 would be, maybe it's just an extension of yours, to be honest. I think, so let's just simply say conflict sometimes inside the team is task-based. So maybe there's one deliverable that wasn't as the other person needed or expected. I think these things are relatively easy. The tough part for a leader is when it becomes personal. When there's a personal vendetta or something like that brewing or already going on. And I think in this case, what really helps is if you have from the get-go with your team and with new members been very clear on what kind of values are at the basis of the behavior that everybody is held accountable for in the team. And so very often when you have a personal conflict, one of them has maybe been violating one of those values, and you can have a conversation based on that with both people involved, if there's 2, and just pretty much remind them of their accountability to go back to the behavior that they had agreed to be part of in that team, and then solve their problems in on a non-personal basis. So I think this will help just have this kind of conversation, and this removes you as the leader to take any sides from the get-go.
Right, because if you have what you're describing is a team charter, the team has a way of behaving, and trust and conflict come into that behavior. So when it arises, you refer to the agreements you've made, a team operating agreement, if you like. In fact, if a team doesn't have that, as a leader listening to this, I think that makes for a really wonderful team meeting, you know, moving away from data points and tactical stuff and almost stop everything and set up a team meeting just to agree the team operating agreement, because that's what's going to help you moving forward with any kind of team conflict.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's a really good idea. Okay.
Like yeah, all right. Well, we've dealt with that one. What's
Yeah,
next?
we dealt with that one. Let's go to number two. Number two is related, but it's different. Number two is peer conflict. Conflict between you and your peer leaders. What would be your number one idea for a leader to help with the situation like that?
You know, instinctively, I'm drawn to say the word feedback. And part of it is about, you know, am I the mediator in this as the leader? So am I going to pull both of them into a room and say, right, off you go, and help them? Or maybe I'm the leader that says, hey, Frank, listen, if you've got a problem with Brad, you need to be giving him this feedback. And maybe I'm working with you one-on-one, coaching you to help you give the feedback in order to resolve that situation. But instinctively, my feeling is that as a leader, I need to be able to help my team give each other feedback. And therefore, I need to adopt more of a kind of coaching style in order to encourage them not to come and bring it to me, but to bring it to each other, to create that healthy bond that develops trust from our previous answer. So it's feedback, helping them give each other feedback to resolve the issues on the table.
That's good. I meant, though, peer conflict in terms of you have a conflict with another leader who happens to be your peer.
So not in the team, you mean as in...
Right, not in the team.
Right, okay. So then I refer the honourable gentleman to my previous answer.
Yeah.
Which is, it's all about the feedback, right? It's about that opportunity to give explicit feedback. And the technique, I think, from a tip perspective, is the famous SBI: situation, behavior, impact. So I would come to you, Frank, and I would say, hey, Frank, I've got some feedback for you. Do you want it now or later? And you'll probably say now. And then I'll say to you, and Frank, listen, we're peers, so do you want me to dress it up a little bit, or shall I just say it straight? And then you'll probably tell me to say it straight. And then I'll use SBI to structure the message, which is, look, Frank, this is the situation I observed. This was the behavior you exhibited. And this was the impact it had on me. What I'd like to do is have a conversation with you now to explore how we can make sure that doesn't happen again. Could you help me understand it from your point of view? And for me, this peer conflict, so rather than peer-to-peer in the team, is the opportunity to use the very robust SBI model of giving somebody situation, behavior, impact feedback, and then engage in a conversation that helps you understand what they were trying to do in that moment. Maybe explain, oh no, that wasn't my intention. I'm sorry if it had that impact. Let's find a way of communicating better in future. So you create a very safe environment. You ask permission to give the feedback. You use the SBI to give the feedback. And then you ask them to help you understand it from their point of view.
That's great, Brad. I actually would have said the same, that I think this is the way to go. I know that it works between peers from manager to manager to have this conversation most of the time. Because as a manager, unless you're super new, it begins to dawn on you that things are very complex, and often there's another viewpoint also that you did not know of. So complementing the feedback that you give with an invitation to listen to the other person's perspective, because maybe after all, in some way, it was you or what you've been doing with your team that actually was difficult for the other person to deal with. Maybe it was that. But these things come to light in the moment you are willing to listen and give the feedback to each other. And in my experience, they actually can resolve quite nicely this way, often resulting in stronger bonds afterwards, by the way.
Yeah, often if we're able to confront the situation rather than ignore it, we create a healthier relationship moving forward.
Yeah.
Do you feel as though what happens, just as an extra tip maybe, for people who are a bit more resistant to receiving the feedback, maybe actually you give them the feedback in that beautiful way we described, and actually you create even more disharmony with the individual who becomes defensive, maybe becomes a little bit more assertive? What could we maybe do in that situation?
So I would say not walk away. So don't accept the pushback in the terms of that, okay, I'm going to walk away, this person is hopeless to deal with, but stay on it a little bit, ask a couple of questions. Go and ask more questions. You need more information for you to understand why a person is reacting that particular way. And once you and unless you have that information, unless you have somehow unlocked that information, you will not know what to do next, other than escalating it maybe and have someone else deal with it. But actually, that's not really the way you want it to happen. So I would just stay on it, say, so if somebody is resisting, if somebody is pushing back, that you say, you need to help me understand this. Or use what I said last time when I said, did you mean to come across so pushy or something like that, you know, whatever the behavior was. And
yeah, I was literally going to highlight what you said last week, actually, which is that, you know, hey, Frank, I just want to check with you here. Do you mean to be coming across quite so defensive to the feedback? And give them a chance to kind of pull back from their position.
Yeah.
Because when you talk top tips, often it's always like the nirvana, the ideal way things resolve. But actually, sometimes you might catch somebody, they're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress.
Yeah.
The last thing they want is feedback from one of their peers telling them they don't like their behavior.
Yes, exactly. It really sucks when the counterpart isn't playing back by the book.
Right? It's like, sorry, that's not what it says in my training.
Yeah, you go, yeah, that's not what it says in my book. You're doing it wrong, man.
Could I just send you over what you're meant to say in this moment?
Yeah.
But I like the fact that you say, you know, don't step away from it.
Mm.
I think it's important when dealing with feedback, especially from a peer-to-peer perspective, that yes, we're creating intimacy with them, but we need to stay credible in that moment, right? We can't just step away from not owning that feedback. We have to own it in a more collaborative approach to, as you say, you know, listen, you really need to help me understand this here. What's going on?
Yeah.
And I wonder if, you know, we talk about the how, the what people should say, but I also feel maybe there's a point here about how we say it. And something that's always helped me in these situations is I don't talk in bold statements when I'm giving feedback to a peer. I want to be respectful of the relationship, so I talk more tentatively.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, I've noticed that, you know, on 3 occasions this has happened. You know, do you mean to be coming across quite so? I'm not talking in bold, hey, Frank, you did this and it upset me. And it's not too bold and too upfront. It's a little bit more tentative. And this has really helped for me create an environment where people are more open to exploring and expressing themselves.
Yeah, this can help. But I think it depends a little bit on the personality you're confronting, or the personality that you are yourself, whether that is in your nature or in your abilities even to be like that. You know, imagine, you know, 2 alpha people having this problem, none of them is going to choose this path. It's going to be quite hard. So understanding the other person's personality also gives you a clue about how you can approach them.
Which suggests implicitly that we need to prepare feedback when we've got conflict with a peer, to know what you're going to say as well as how you're going to say it.
Right. Yeah. I guess in your example, if I would come to a very strong, outspoken personality with this rather careful way, this person might judge it as submissive and is probably instinctively not respecting you for it. Some people just need a different kind of approach. For some people, it has to be very direct.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's another subject for another talk.
Episode 26.
Let's go to number 3. So,
yes, come on, what have we got?
Number 3 is confronting your boss, which means situations in which you as a leader do not concur with your boss.
I tell you what, I'm going to let you go first on this one because you most recently have been a boss of many people. So I would like to hear your first stab at this one.
Okay, let me just first of all say we're talking about challenges that you have or may have as a leader that are relatively common. So you understand that you are part of a hierarchy and you are a gear in a gearbox of a larger system, and that in some way whatever you're responsible for needs to function. And it's generally accepted that there's direction coming from somewhere up the hierarchy that somehow you as a manager have to go and implement. Now, there are situations in which you will feel strongly about that a particular direction that you've been asked to go, a particular action that you've been asked to take with your team is not the right one. It could not be the right one from a tactical perspective. It could not be the right one from an ethical perspective. Even it can have all sorts of reasons. But let's say you feel strongly about that you should not be going down that road. So your next step would be to go and confront your boss, your manager, with your thoughts. That is something that a lot of people dread doing because they understand it. Also, that's very cultural, I must say. In certain cultures, it's easier to do that. In other cultures, it's like suicide. Now, still, so there is a certain level of anxiety, sometimes more, sometimes less, associated with confronting your boss. And I would say one of the best ways to do that, in case there is a certain level of anxiety or pressure in the relationship between the two, is to do what you just suggested earlier. Don't come with too much strong statements. Offer maybe another perspective. So you can say, hey boss, I've been thinking about this. We can do it the way you asked. I see a way in which we may be getting some extra benefits or doing things faster or doing things better. Would you like to hear it? And I think most of the time, if your boss has a few minutes, he's going to say, all right, I'm going to hear you. What's on your mind? And that's a way where you can say, all right, so this is a way I would be doing this. And in my way, we would be avoiding problem A, B, and C that you have identified. So that's then for the boss to consider. Most people will consider if you're not too pushy. Sometimes I think I must say though, in ethical things or so, you have to be pushy, and your career at that place may count less than doing the right thing. But on tactical things, that's how you could have a conversation, and when you don't have a really, really good, same eye level conversation with your boss.
I suppose it depends. Again, it goes back to the last point, doesn't it, of what is the profile of that individual, so you can choose the right approach. But you've always got in the back of your mind the hierarchy issue, and not everybody is open to having feedback.
Yeah.
in spite of what they say. And actually, I would be prone to give similar messaging when it comes to a top tip for giving feedback up the chain. I think it's about recognizing the hierarchy, but also acknowledging that based on the team operating agreement, that this is one of those moments where I want to explore whether or not this is the best approach. And this is the phrase my team always use with me.
Yeah. They're smart.
So if I make a suggestion on say a workshop or an outline, and I'm looking for feedback from the guys, they will come to me and say, hey Brad, listen, when have you got time to have a chat? I want to explore if this is the best route forward. or if this is the best way to go to market. And I like this idea of the way they say, is this the best way? Because implicit in that is that there is always another way. And it puts me on notice as the leader to step back from my position, to not try and be, you know, the one who makes the decisions and I decide the way, and actually realizing that being open to the feedback, we may actually come up with a better option or a better solution.
Yeah.
And I think that, is this the best way forward, is a really neat way that has always instantly pulled me back from holding a position. And it seems a lovely way to receive feedback. So it would be my tip for how to do it with other leaders.
Great, super tip. Okay, let's go to number 4.
Okay.
Number 4 is employee performance problem. So you are a leader, you're a manager, and one of your employees does have a performance problem. What would be your number 1 tip on how to deal with that situation?
And obviously it's not an option just to get rid of them, right?
Not yet.
I think, you know, and I said with a smile, I guess it depends a little bit on how long this has been going on or when I started to notice it. And implicit within your question for me is another question, which is, have I been giving ongoing performance feedback to this individual? Because I think a lot of leaders where we fall down is we assume high-level delivery and execution. And we tend to only come to our people when things are going wrong. So the way they know how they're doing is if we come to them and say, hey, Frank, listen, can we have a chat? I'm not sure about what you were producing there. So for me, in order to create an environment where we can deal with a performance issue, we need to actually check ourselves with regards to how are we managing performance on an ongoing basis, and how consistent are we with how we give those messages. Because if I'm coming to you twice a year when you make a mistake, then it's just about giving you feedback. But if we're having ongoing conversations about your performance, execution, then actually the tip I would be recommending here is having coaching conversations, and to almost use the feedback as a way of, how can I have a coaching conversation to get this person to really own their development? So not about me saying, hey, Frank, you did this wrong, this is how it needs to be, but actually highlighting with feedback what I'm observing, giving you some data-based evidence so we don't have to debate it, it's factual. But the real reason for giving this message is so that we can have a coaching conversation to help you unlock how you're going to do it moving forward, making improvements and sustaining that as we move through each week, month, and quarter. So a lot of it rests on the leader and their MO, their sort of modus operandi in how they manage performance on an ongoing basis. And busy leaders sometimes struggle to do that with the regularity required to make some of those conversations about performance issues a lot easier than they actually need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. The coaching conversations are going to be, and the ongoing feedback are going to be critical for not letting a performance problem fester, so to speak. So I would complement it with the following. So I would go grab you, Brad, and have a conversation with you if the coaching didn't work really, okay? And ask you, and just tell you, Brad, you know, you have this particular job and your performance is not on par with everyone else. So I need to understand, what is it that is holding you back? Is it something that we're doing? Is it something within the team? Is it a tool that we're not giving? Is it an education that we have not provided? Or is it simply that you're not enjoying doing what you do? Right? Because that's very often, because I think if I let this happen for too long, it becomes my fault as the leader. I need to see whether somebody actually has the capability and the passion and the interest, or at least the enthusiasm, not necessarily the passion, to do the job the way it needs to be done. And so I need to ask. And more often than not, you'll be surprised how many people will get back to you and saying, in principle, saying, I'm glad you asked. I have a problem with this and that. You know, I've been thrown into doing this with the new software, but I never had a training. So it's much harder for me to, you know, make many more mistakes than everybody else who had the training just shortly before I joined. You know, something like that. I'm just making this up. And this can be things that may have been flying under your radar. You're just seeing, Brad's not on par with everyone else. He has a performance problem. It's his fault. Not always, right?
So it could be the landscape I'm working in. It could be the tools I'm being used to operate. It could be maybe even something in my personal life that's getting in the way and meaning I can't commit the right time. Unless we ask and find out, actually, hey, listen, tell me, what is it that's getting in the way here? We won't always know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hear you. And I think, you know, when you say that, it reminds me, I was on a training workshop a couple of years ago, and I adopted this from that workshop. They said, whenever doing performance management, to look at two things before you give feedback and have the conversation. And the two things they would ask for is you have to assess whether or not it's a content problem or a pattern problem with performance.
Yeah, good way of looking at it.
Yeah, so the content problem is maybe it's a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't deliver something on time and it makes you 75% of the target for that month. So I need to call it out, but it's only a one-off. So maybe there's nothing to it. Probably something got in the way. But if I see a pattern, if it happens more than once, then that requires the coaching conversation, really to start unlocking and unpicking, look, what is this? Let's really spend some time and think about what's going on for the individual. How can I support them as their leader? And maybe even how the team can support them. And it really helped me know the right moment to come into somebody when performance managing, because it's such a sensitive topic. Most people feel like they're working really hard and giving, you know, everything they can. So when things are not going well, it can be, or at least start off, a little bit of a negative experience for them.
No.
So
That's
content
right.
and pattern has really helped me unpack which way I should go when it comes to dealing with the performance issues.
Yeah, I like that. And if you go to the, if it comes to the situation that you've checked all the angles, you've done all the coaching, but the person you're looking at is simply overwhelmed with the task, incompetent, maybe a toxic personality, whatever it really is that you cannot resolve anymore in any reasonable way because you're not hired to be a therapist, usually. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be making the efforts that we just described, because these are general leader management skills. But if it comes to the point that you say, all right, there is the only reasonable way forward would be terminating an employee, which is our number 5. That is a situation that a lot of managers are dreading. I think it's actually a good thing that you don't get too comfortable with terminating people. I think it should be something hard.
I agree.
But how can you make yourself do this and don't lose too many nights of sleep over it?
You know, in my mind's eye, like I have this word coming all the time, which is audit trail. Audit trail, audit trail, audit trail. And I feel as though as a leader, I should be tracking my people every week, every month, every quarter. We should be feeding back, being attentive to the results, but, you know, being accountable for those results. And if we've created in our team operating agreement from our first point, and the team have agreed to commit to standards, then I shouldn't need to lose sleep if I notice that a pattern has emerged. I've had maybe 1, 2, 3 conversations around this person's engagement with what we're doing. And then it comes to a point where actually this isn't the right place for this person to grow and succeed. And at the end of the day, even though it's a really horrible conversation to have, if you have to either let someone go, or maybe the step before, put them on an improvement plan, because this requires micromanagement. I think we need to be humble and always leverage data. I wouldn't want to go into a conversation around termination without, one, having lots of data to hand so I can show a track that we've both been on, both been engaged in. And on top of that, especially if you're working in like EMEA, APAC, global wide teams, that I've spoken to my HR function to understand the legal requirements around moving somebody on. Because ultimately, the conversation, once a decision's been made, is just about a structured approach to asking someone to move on. But it's everything else that goes beforehand that needs to be in place, I think, that is the sensitive bit.
Yeah, this will help you, of course, also from a psychological standpoint to fall back on, not just from a process standpoint for you, also from a psychological standpoint, to give you confirmation that you're on the right course. It will be the right thing to do this, right? Because you just look at this sheet of paper that has, a list of your audit trail, the list of the incidents or whatever it was, that you were, if you didn't make any notes about this, will probably not really remember, only selectively, and it's an incomplete picture. But with this, it becomes much more clearer that it's the right thing to do. And, I must confess, I've never been very diligent with doing frequent note-taking on all aspects of performance, because not just performance, also behaviors. However, I've been always very close to the people as much as I could, at least. And I must say that there was another thing that would help me, and that is keeping the bigger picture in mind. The bigger picture is often, when somebody has to be terminated, not because the company is shrinking or something like that, just because you decided it would be the right thing to do, is that usually somebody who is either very underperforming and is not learning, or is somebody with a toxic behavior, something like that, or anything in between, actually is a source of misery for all of the rest. And you cannot afford, as the leader or the managers, to have other talent leave, because that's what often happens, because the work environment becomes just not gratifying anymore, not satisfying anymore, if it's something that has to do with toxic behavior, but also if everybody has to shoulder the work of somebody who is not delivering their part. That is something that I think helps prevent, or at least make sleepless nights a little bit shorter, if if you remove the person from the equation, you are actually helping everyone else. And I think this is maybe a perspective for one or the other leader to incorporate or play with in their mind and see what it does for them. But for me, it was always a great help. Because as you say, in the end, sitting in front of a person saying, you and I, or the company and you, we need to go separate ways, is often it's a tough experience, because as a human being, the other person is also a human being. It may be quite tough for them, maybe finding a new job or whatever the situation is. Maybe they're a little bit older than others, and then it's going to be harder for them. And all these things are in your mind, and but you need to have something to prevent you from making this your guilt.
I think you're absolutely right. And you go right to the heart of the challenge for any leader, which is to sit in front of somebody and say, hey, listen, today's going to be your last day.
Yeah.
I want to have a conversation about making it as smooth as possible, because I think we must, as leaders, look after our people until they walk out the door. And it can't be some cold discussion just based on data. It has to be based on the people. And I don't know about you, Frank, but when I've had to let people go in the past, I'm often pleasantly surprised at when I look at their face, sometimes even during the conversation, but always at the end, they seem a little relieved. Like the pressure was building on them, and actually they needed somebody to say, hey, do you know what? I'm not sure this is for you.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, they have that opportunity to look at the world from different glasses and decide, actually, what are they going to do differently now?
Yeah.
It's painful in the moment, but the relief, you can almost taste it.
Exactly, because you will know that when you're the one sitting on the wrong end of the table, so to speak, in this situation, you will also know that you're not actually happy, probably. Because if you are always underperforming, if you find yourself in constant struggle with others, and even if you're the reason for it, it's something that cannot feel right. You know, so, and I think I agree that I also had people that, you know, later on were so much more happy in a completely different environment. Sometimes it's just the environment. You have to be cut out for the environment.
Right.
And sometimes you're on the wrong one. So yes, you might be helping someone, but you don't really know it before. Of course, you can't have the conversation saying like, from tomorrow you're not no longer come to the office, but you'll feel great.
Yeah, right. No one's going to appreciate that approach.
No, I don't think that's going to work.
But it does, to your point, highlight why we shouldn't lose sleep over it. Because ultimately, 9 times out of 10, people do come to that conclusion themselves. And once they've been through the pain piece of, wow, that's really disappointing, maybe they feel let down or they've let you down. Actually, what makes me not lose sleep is knowing that the greater good, the bigger picture, is more important than the moment when everyone's going to feel really uncomfortable.
Yes, precisely. Okie dokie, were our top 5 most common people leadership challenges, Brett.
I love the idea of it. I think within today's session, you've inspired in me, Frank. We should do a few more top 5 episodes and find some topics to explore. Our top 5 tips. That was really good fun.
Right, in our spontaneous, unprepared way, but highly enthusiastic delivery.
Always. I love it. Frank, that was brilliant. I'll see you next week for another Real Talk.
Likewise, we're going to do that.
Great. Brilliant. Bye, Frank.
Bye-bye.